Speaker, I apologise unreservedly for the offence that it has caused up and down the country, and I apologise for the impression that it gives.
Such a small word, and yet it can be so powerful. Well, let's talk to behavioural psychologist Joe Hemmings now. Joe, why do you think Boris hasn't apologised and dug his heels in and refused to capitulate on this one?
Hey, Alex. Look, I think one of the reasons is if you take an adult apology, what it is or should be is something where you've seen the consequences of harm someone or hurt someone, and so therefore you apologise with sincerity and say, yeah, I didn't want to do that. Now we've got to assume that Boris doesn't care that much, that he wants to apologise. It's very strange at this point to force someone constantly into an apology. If he doesn't mean it sincerely, there is no point really in him apologising. He could do the sorry, not sorry type of apology, which is the projecting apology that says, I'm sorry for how you feel about it, which takes away the accountability from him having said those words. I actually think not apologising for this is quite empowering for Boris. I think he likes it. I think he can still hang on with all this chaos around him and not apologise. He knew what he was saying with those words, and he said them deliberately. They didn't come out of his head as a clever quip or a foolish thing to say. He knew what he was going to say, and he knew the impact it would have. So to force him to apologise ultimately will be a very insincere apology, which he's had to do in order, once again, to save his skin.
I mean, the problem perhaps is by making this comment in the first place when, frankly, a lot of people thought he should be showing contrition at the dispatch box and apologising for the Partygate scandals that have been constantly leaked to the press, that it does make that word carry a whole lot less or a whole lot more significance. Would he have been better to retract the comments as soon as he made them and the audible intake of breath echoed around the Commons?
100%. Because that would have meant he had the awareness that he'd said something inappropriate, which he knew it was. He should have retracted it then. The longer this goes on, the less of an apology, in inverted commas, it can possibly be. Because clearly, if he sincerely felt he had said the wrong thing and he had caused harm or he had caused hurt, whatever the consequences are, he would have already apologised. To drag him into an apology that can have no real authenticity or sincerity in it seems to be kind of pointless, and we're losing the plot once again. There are all sorts of things going on in this world politically that need dealing with, and his apology, I think we just got to let it go.
The point earlier, and you're right to say that there's a lot going on politically, but it seems to me there was a group of oddballs lurking around Parliament yelling about all sorts of nonsense, from microchips to the Magna Carta, and indeed they mobbed two politicians and their ugly pictures, and that shouldn't happen. But do you think that a group of protesters like that are actually incited by the comments Boris Johnson made in Parliament? Or do you think, frankly, they'd be there with their placards and their craziness anyway, and that this is just the media whipping up and trying to confect some way that Boris Johnson's now responsible for this?
In parts, I think they were incited. I think they would have done it anyway. As you say, we've seen little clips that just look like they've been going on about Jimmy Savile. In fact, the longer clip, as you would say, is about all sorts of things, from the Magna Carta to whatever. I think what it gives them is a bit of fuel to their fire. I think that's what it does. So there is a certain degree of incitement. We've heard it referred to as Trumpian in the last few days, that Boris is adopting this sort of style in that sense that he knows what he's doing, and he knows that those protests might get a bit worse, or it's awful when you see what has happened. So I do think there is a level of incitement in there, but I think those guys would have been, they'll protest to anything if they get the opportunity, so they would have been there anyway.
Joe, thank you ever so much. Joe Hemmings, behavioural psychologist there, decrypting all of the accusations flying around and, well, telling us that sorry really can be quite quite powerful. Now, Ben, I mean, you know, she sort of said, yes, when you give people these arms, these sort of words they can use as weapons, they're going to do it. It was an unwise thing to say in the first place, wasn't it? Because if anything, it did stop Boris from actually looking genuinely contrite.
Yeah, I don't think it was a sensible thing to say, but anything in politics that you say gives ammunition to protesters or people who sort of go out and get very angry and surround politicians in Westminster. It's been happening forever. You know, you say something about Brexit and people will take on those slogans and go out and shout them at people. It's always going to be the case. The question is whether or not it was right to say in the first place. I don't think it was right to say. Should he apologise? Probably not. I think it's in that grey area between the two things where now he's said it, the worst thing he could possibly do is come out and start apologising for it, because it's one of those things which is probably not what you'd say in the first place, but it wasn't, I don't think it was incendiary. He didn't say go out and burn down Westminster. He didn't say something that was really outrageous. It wasn't a direct incitement. It was just maybe a misjudged comment.
Well, what do you think about this, great viewers of GB News? Should Boris Johnson apologise to Sir Keir Starmer? Email me, gbviews@gbnews.uk, or tweet me @GBNews. You're with GB News on TV and DAB radio. Time for a short break now and a check on the weather forecast.
Hello again. A three-way split across the country today. Cloudy and mild in the south, showery but colder in the north, and in between across central parts, a large amount of cloud and some outbreaks of rain and drizzle. Because of this weather front, that's where the rain will be focused through the rest of the day, northern England into parts of Northern Ireland, southern Scotland and North Wales. But it's really staying where it is, and it divides the country between mostly cloudy but some brighter spells in the south, and brighter but also colder with some blustery showers for Scotland, parts of Northern Ireland, and those showers falling as snow above 300 or 400 metres. So feeling cold in the wind in the north, but mild where we get some brightness coming through in the south, even as high as 14 Celsius for the likes of London. And then into the evening, the cloudy damp zone in the middle becomes wetter for a time as some heavier bursts of rain push into parts of the Pennines, the Lake District, as well as Snowdonia, and the front slowly sips south. But we keep the mild air to the south, 8 or 9 Celsius through the night here. Colder for Scotland, Northern Ireland, the far north of England, and again blustery showers, and it's turning colder, so that snow line is coming down, and that means we could even see sleet, hail, snow down to lower levels for central and northern Scotland during Wednesday. Certainly snow building up over any modest hills, really 200 metres and above. The cloud and outbreaks of rain sink south, and it'll be a damp day in places in the far south, but nothing particularly heavy, and it stays mild, 13 Celsius there. But in the north, across Wales, northern England, as well as Scotland and Northern Ireland, brighter skies, some sunshine, however it will feel cold. And the wind picks up further in the far north on Wednesday night and into the start of Thursday. Gales or severe gales for the Northern Isles for a time. And Thursday looks like a blustery day for all of us, but brighter skies are pushing south for Friday.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate
from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel
right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before.
Basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Growing rape culture in schools is clear to see on the website Everyone's Invited, with more than 50,000 heartbreaking accounts of kids sexually assaulting one another. Porn is now cited in 60% of divorces. Meanwhile, the biggest free site, Pornhub, had to delete 80% of its videos in 2020 because they were of child abuse or rape. Over 10 million videos taken down within days of that investigation. Every click feeds a multi-billion-dollar industry of trafficking, grooming, rape, revenge porn and abuse, while Pornhub alone attracts over 42 billion visits a year. Well, today, the UK government claims it's leading the world in online safety by introducing age verification. Oh, do get on. France and Germany announced that years ago. But is the issue simply who is watching? A study by American academics found that 88% of pornography now contains violence against women, gagging, slapping, spitting, hair pulling, forceful penetration and unnatural acts. A third of men under 40 now suffer erectile dysfunction, compared to just 2% 2 decades ago. Oh yes, children should not see extreme content. But my question is, should it even exist at all? Well, joining me now on the show is adult film entertainer Brooklyn Blue and Executive Director of the Age Verification Providers Association, Ian Corby. Ian, I'm going to start with you, because a big government announcement today is porn websites must have age verification to stop children accessing adult content. Already there's a crowd of people going, it'll never work, why bother? What's your response?
Well, it certainly works. I mean, first of all, we're already doing thousands of age checks every hour of every day for people who are buying alcohol online or perhaps going to gamble online instead. So age checking in itself is already part of our day-to-day life. But as more and more of our life is going online, and we're looking at things like the metaverse, as they describe it, it seems only right that we get it sorted now, such that the norms of society about what we allow our kids to do are going to be represented online as well as in the real world. You wouldn't let people kids walk around Soho, walking into casinos and betting shops and strip joints without them being stopped at the door. And effectively, that's what we now need to do online. And so we're very pleased the government's made this announcement. It's been a long time coming, as I'm sure you know, Alex.
Yeah, indeed. Well, Brooklyn, it's lovely having you back on the show again. I tweeted about this earlier, fairly sort of strident remarks. And a lot of people said, oh, why don't you ask porn actresses what it's like? They love their job. This is great. All this content's fine. What's your position when it comes to these sort of online free, big porn giants who allow user-generated content? Do you think it needs regulation?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the porn industry in itself has had debates with the free sites for years and years and years. I mean, we don't like the free sites. That number one, they stole from our revenue, and then on top of that, it's just so it's unrestricted. There's no sort of rules to it, or there's no sort of laws with it. Obviously, within our industry, it's very on. You have to prove everything, and you have to have IDs, and everything's verified. And the free sites, obviously, it's kind of a free for all. And we've always, said that there should be age verification, and I think it's brilliant that they're finally doing that, because it does need to be done. I mean, it's become more accessible, and it does need to have some sort of regimen with it, where it is, stopping the vulnerable getting onto these sites when they shouldn't be on there. There is an age limit to it for a reason, and if they're bringing in a law that will guarantee that people that are looking at that kind of thing are over age, then we're absolutely all for that. But it has to be the free sites and the paid sites. It can't just be one or the other, or it would never work.
I'm going to come back to you, Ian, because one of the proposals for age verification checks would be to put in bank card details. And there's outrage from people saying, oh, I don't feel safe putting my bank card details into such unwholesome sites, which to me begs the question of whether you can trust their content. But, I mean, would that be the best approach? Because at the moment, you've got a cursory box where you just click and say, I'm over 18. It does need to be something a lot more granular in nature, surely.
Well, I certainly wouldn't recommend you handing around whether it's your credit card details or your passport details or any part of your identity actually to a pornographic website directly. That's why the whole age verification sector has been designed around independent third parties who are very closely regulated by the Information Commissioner and other regulators, including Ofcom, to make sure that only they will use your data, and they only use it briefly in order to check your age. And then after that, all they're saying to the adult websites is yes or no to a question, is this user over 18 or not? And so, I completely agree that what we need is a level playing field. We need to make sure that all these sites are required to have age verification on the same day. So not just picking on the household names, because users will very quickly switch to other sites. We need to have enforcement at scale on D-Day when age verification comes in.
And Brooklyn, I mean, I raised in my introduction there the fact that academic studies in America have shown that 88% of pornographic videos display some sort of violent or abusive treatment of women. Are you aware of that sort of escalating now in the amateur porn industry? And does that concern you?
I mean, the amateur porn industry is a completely different category to what I'm in. And obviously, with the amateur side, it's amateur performers. So there is less regulation there to the actual the high-end industry. And that is an issue. However, I always go back to the same thing. It's about education, and I do totally believe that, and really think that they do. I think they did it in America, but they haven't done it here. Where have people in the industry go into the colleges and that, and actually educate the younger generation on what real life is. What you're watching, it's not real. It really isn't real, and there is a lack of education in it. It's very like, oh, you can't talk about that in England, and it's kind of it's an education lack, and they need to teach people in colleges and that this isn't real. It's fantasy. It's made up. It's not real, and it's different in real life. It's not what you see in the films is not how it is in real life. I think I said before, it's like a Hollywood movie. It's all mask and mirrors, and there is a lack of education on that side, and the only way to get that into people's heads is to educate them on it.
Yeah, now, Ian, we've obviously got you here to talk about age verification, but what about video upload verification? Because it strikes me, when you've got crimes such as revenge porn, when you've got people who have been trafficked involved in the creation of some of these videos, people who are under duress or being exploited, videos that are violent in nature or present to the viewers something that, frankly, is criminal, surely there needs to be a filter as well of who's putting the videos up and what's in those videos.
Absolutely, and this is really interesting. It shows that actually a service like MasterCard is far more influential with this industry than any national government. So MasterCard introduced last year some rules that said if you are allowing people to upload, you need to check that, first of all, the uploader is over 18 and that all the people featured in those videos have given consent. And that actually is really behind why 80% of content was taken down by some of these free tube sites. I completely agree with you. We would like to see Visa adopt the same rules as MasterCard, because that is actually what is causing the adult industry to put in phone calls to our members to say, right, now we really need to figure out how we're going to comply with these regulations. And it also shows how the UK government will be able to enforce on these sites, which are mostly based overseas, because they can talk to the payment services providers who will withdraw services from those sites when they're non-compliant with British law.
Brooklyn Blue, Ian Corby, thank you so much for opening up this debate, and thank you so much for your professional insight into what is a huge social issue. Well, Ben, what are your thoughts on this?
Well, I think it's sort of the principle of policing porn and who's accessing it and who's uploading it is a good one, but my question is about the actual bill itself. So the online safety bill extends beyond just pornography, it extends into all areas, social media, etc. I'm worried about creating the principle of digital identification online and what that then extends to, because there are issues around speech, for example. If everyone has to attach what they say online to their identity in the same way, there are certain repercussions to that. So while I do think it's something that needs to be dealt with in terms of the pornography and in terms of the harms that come from that, we need to be very careful about how we legislate around it and what that could potentially extend into.
Ben, thank you so much. Look, I want to know what you think on this. It's clear what I think, isn't it? I think porn's a public health crisis for pretty much everybody. But email me what you think, gbviews@gbnews.uk, or tweet us at gbnews. And remember that statistic, that after an investigation, 80% of videos, 10 million, had to be removed in a matter of days following an investigation as to whether they were representing abuse, trafficking, or child exploitation. That is surely alarming. Let me know what you think. You're with GB News on TV and DAB radio. Coming up, is football facing finally its Me Too moment, with growing calls for the game to tackle violence against women? First, it's time for a check on the news headlines with Rosie.
Good afternoon, it's 2:32. I'm Rosie Wright, here to keep you up to date on GB News. Jacob Rees-Mogg has been moved from Commons leader to Minister for Brexit Opportunities and Government Efficiency. It's part of a ministerial reshuffle. Mark Spencer has been made leader of the House of Commons. Stuart Andrew is the new Housing Minister. Chris Heaton-Harris is the new Chief Whip. The move follows the appointment of Stephen Barclay, the Cabinet Office Minister, as Mr Johnson's new Chief of Staff. The Health Secretary has pledged an additional £5.9 billion to immediately tackle the backlog of NHS waiting lists in England. Unveiling his new elective recovery plan, Mr Javid promised to cut waiting lists to under a year by 2025. The number of people waiting to start routine hospital treatment in England now stands at 6 million people. That's up from 4.4 million before the pandemic. Commons Speaker Sir Lindsay Hoyle says it was inappropriate for Boris Johnson to claim that Sir Keir Starmer failed to prosecute Jimmy Savile, warning such comments only inflame opinions. The Prime Minister's facing renewed calls to apologise from within his own party. It's after the Labour leader was targeted by a crowd of protesters yesterday, and they were shouting traitor and Savile at him. The TV presenter Bamber Gascoigne has died at the age of 87. The original host of University Challenge passed away at home after a short illness, according to a statement on behalf of his family. Mr Gascoigne was the face of the BBC quiz show for 25 years and coined its catchphrases like "Your start of a 10" and "Fingers on buzzers." British stars Olivia Colman, Benedict Cumberbatch and Andrew Garfield are up for Best Actress and Actor categories in this year's Oscars. Ciarán Hinds, Judi Dench and Jessie Buckley are all nominated for Best Supporting Roles. And Sir Kenneth Branagh is up for Best Director for his film Belfast. The 94th Academy Awards will take place in March, on the 27th in Los Angeles. You're up to date here on GB News. We're online, TV and on DAB Plus radio. A short pause and then we'll be back to We Need to Talk About.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate
from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel
right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before.
Basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
The UK will not flinch over Ukraine, and sanctions will be introduced if Russia invades. That's according to Boris Johnson, writing in The Times today in a move designed to send a clear message to the world. But the message is anything but clear. Western nations can't agree on sanctions against Russia. Joe Biden has threatened to block the Russian gas pipeline to Germany, Nord Stream 2, while Berlin keeps throwing spanners in discussions over reprisals, greedy for Moscow's fuel. And while Boris says the UK is considering sending fighter jets and warships to the region, claiming a Russian attack would strengthen NATO, and the alliance rejects Moscow's demands to rule out Ukraine becoming a member and reducing its military presence in Eastern Europe, French President Emmanuel Macron appears to be saying Russian rhetoric may actually have merit. What happens next is anyone's guess, but resolution looks a long way off. Well, let's talk to a freelance journalist who's based in Ukraine, Stefan Reichert. Stefan, what's the current situation like today?
Well, here in eastern Ukraine, it's quite quiet, you can say. You know, there's a few violations of the ceasefire, but that's quite normal. People go on with their daily life. And of course, some people also follow the news and what's been said and done abroad as well. But it seems like yet another day where people don't know what, if anything, will happen tomorrow.
I mean, there were big words, big bold words by President Emmanuel Macron yesterday saying that he thought he could get an historic solution to the problem and that perhaps we should stop and think about contemporary Russians and what they're going through, and that, you know, maybe Putin does have a point in saying that he feels threatened by NATO. But it seems to me he's walked away from that summit with Vladimir Putin with absolutely nothing. How's that been reported in Ukraine?
Yeah, there's a lot of people in Ukraine who think that this seems very weird that now Macron goes to Moscow and, you know, comes back and saying that, oh, we have to reframe this European security. It's not something that Ukrainians look very fond upon, especially because Macron also said that we have to talk about the Minsk II agreement, this peace agreement that was agreed between, to stop the war, at least to stop the fighting back in 2015. Macron is almost hinting that Ukraine has to implement it as if, and that's something that Ukraine politically and in the normal people's civilian life is not ready to do. So people are looking at this visit and saying that this is not good for what at least Ukraine wants.
Yeah, I mean, Macron is visiting the Ukrainian president today, and it seems to me Liz Truss is meeting her foreign affairs counterpart later. There seems to be a revolving door of Western leaders either, going for face-to-face meetings or picking up the blower to either Kiev or Moscow. And yet surely what we need is not the revolving door, but these Western leaders to actually speak in chorus and actually have one harmonious message.
Yeah, and they're not doing that, right? I mean, everybody's talking about there's going to be some sanctions if tanks or Russian soldiers cross the border and go into Ukraine again. Yes, there'll be some sanctions, but we don't know exactly what the sanctions are going to be. Like, for example, let's look at what Biden said yesterday. He said that if Russia crosses the border, there will be no Nord Stream 2. This gas pipe will be closed down, and then we have the German chancellor at the same press conference not really saying that that's so direct as Biden is saying it. So we don't really know what these sanctions will be. We know there's going to be some sanctions, but how severe and whether they actually can deter Russia from doing anything, we really don't know.
I mean, how familiar is Ukraine with this sort of power projection by Vladimir Putin? Certainly in the east after the annexation of Crimea. The international community kind of tutted and did nothing about it. Is this sort of business as usual now in Ukraine?
Well, especially for the people here in eastern Ukraine, they're not always paying attention to these news. We have to understand, that they have been living with this war like right next to them for the last 8 years. Like right now, I'm only like 3-4 kilometers away from the front line. And in this city here, they are accustomed to the risk of war and accidentally, like some shellings hitting their place where they're living. So they're not so easy to scare. So when they're hearing all this talk about war, all this talk about, maybe sanctions, maybe not, maybe Russia is coming, maybe they're not coming, they're taking it like normal and thinking, okay, that's just how it is, and probably nothing will happen like it used.
Stefan, thank you so much for your contribution. Stay safe and we'll catch up again really soon. That's Stefan Reichert there from Ukraine. What do you think about this, Ben? I mean, it seems to me that Emmanuel Macron was almost condoning Putin's saber-rattling by saying, well, hold on, maybe he's got a point and maybe we can negotiate our way to some sort of compromise agreement. Yeah. I mean, what Putin's doing is evidently threatening what's supposed to be a sovereign nation and then making unreasonable demands.
Well, Macron is a bit of a troublemaker, isn't he? He quite likes stirring things up. He did it with Brexit. He's done it with the Channel migrant crisis. He's done it with pretty much every single policy. He always likes to sort of take not a nuanced position, but a position that will sort of shake things up a bit. He never goes along with the sort of the line, as it were. Boris, however, I think is using this to some degree to get away from certain allegations, bad press. If there's a united front against one common enemy, it's a lot easier for him to get the MPs together in his own party, prevent that rebellion from happening, and secure his position as Prime Minister. So he's, I think, got some sort of, he gains from there being tensions with Ukraine and Russia. I don't think, however, it's the time to start posturing against Russia, because at the moment we're pursuing a net zero policy on green energy, which means that we actually rely on Russia a lot for our energy because we're not producing our own, we're not pursuing things that would make us energy independent. If we start going toward Russia, we might find ourselves in a very tricky position there. And in terms of what's actually happened on the border with Ukraine, I don't think that the justification is there yet for the action that we're looking to take. I think there are other motivations. Also, look at Boris's main sort of heroes. You've got Churchill and Thatcher. Both leaders used war as a way to bolster up support for their premiership. So Churchill, obviously, Hitler, the Nazis, all the rest of it, and Thatcher, the Falklands War. So conflict is a really good way of gathering support for a leader, and I think Boris is very aware of that.
I mean, similar sort of accusations have been made against America and the role they're playing all of this, with Moscow saying that they're the ones inflaming the tensions. But what is interesting here is perhaps it's the nature of post-Brexit Britain. There's always been this tug of war when it comes to EU foreign policy and American foreign policy. And at one point, it was very much that the UK seemed to be in the EU camp, whereas now it seems to me that it's the transatlantic duo really leading forward, and the EU holding back and saying, well, we don't want to be involved in this because we've got economic interests to consider.
Yeah, that's definitely part of it, and especially when you look at the American thing, there's a similar thing with the Cold War. That's such a huge part of, memory, cultural memory for a lot of people, the idea of the beast in the East. Russia is a big threat. China's probably a bigger threat to America now. India even, even though they're sort of allied to some degree, but economically and they're growing superpowers, it's not Russia that they need to necessarily be concerned about. It's the economic changes, it's the social changes, the growth of China and India and Iran even, gathering nuclear programs. But when you look at Russia as a very easy beast in the East type enemy to point at and go, right, okay, everyone's got to get behind us because we've got this big threat coming from Russia, I think a lot of it is historical and it's not necessarily accurate. There may be some trouble going on with Ukraine, but I think a lot of world leaders are using it as a way to shore up support in their own countries.
Interesting point there, Ben. Thank you so much for your contribution. Well, listen, every time you open a newspaper at the moment, it seems a footballer has been accused of rape. Or if not violence against women, kicking cats. The repugnant and repeated horrific behaviours of multi-millionaire sportsmen seems to not only be kind of accepted in sport in general, but allegedly covered up by their teams and clubs. Well, today, a trio of women's rights groups have called time on the pandemic of sexual abuse in football and have written an open letter to the Premier League and the FA demanding action. Quite right too. The skin-crawling spectacle of overpaid men taking the knee and decrying racist tweets looks worse than sickeningly hypocritical when set against the backdrop of the deafening silence surrounding repeated and revolting abuse of women. Surely it's time for zero tolerance, however big the star. Well, joining us now on the show is domestic abuse survivor and campaigner Zoe Drumfield. Zoe, as a survivor, what are your thoughts on this? I mean, it's pretty harrowing when you see day after day after day allegations of this, frankly, dreadful behaviour towards women from big Premier League footballers, and yet it keeps going on and no one's taking the knee for that.
Yeah, exactly. It's quite right what you say. You know, the double standards of it is unbelievable, really. The fact that they're, on one respect, they're trying to put out this reputation that they're taking their knee and they care about these social things. However, violence against women and girls is almost accepted. You know, why are we giving these celebrity statuses to young men that don't seem to understand what a healthy relationship is? And I really think that the associations, they've got to take some responsibility for this.
I mean, is it not the problem that essentially these are incredibly young men who are suddenly cast into the realms of millionaires being paid hundreds of thousands of pounds per week, which to lots of women out there is actually the keys to the kingdom if they manage to bag a footballer. But it seems to me that every single time this comes out, the newspapers report on it, the big football associations don't do anything. What would you like to see them do?
Well, I think the open letter that's being sent to them, let's hear the response. You know, what are they going to actually do about this? Because they have a responsibility. These young men are role models for the next generation of young men, and it's not good enough. And they have a responsibility. They're going through their ranks. So it is down to them. They must get involved.
Do you think this is a problem that affects football in particular, simply down to perhaps the huge sums involved, maybe the nature and backgrounds of some of the players? You know, people often say it's a gentleman's sport played by hooligans, whereas rugby is a hooligan sport played by gentlemen, although there's been plenty of incidents of pretty unpalatable behaviour in rugby union football and rugby league as well. But it does seem to be something that affects football especially. Do you think there's a connection there with just the sheer sums of money these people are paid, and that sort of gifts them a sense of impunity when it comes to their behaviour?
Yeah, I mean, I think that they've got hugely inflated egos. And this is why education is key, and the football associations need to step in and ensure that those egos are, you know, deflated, if you like, because, you know, yes, they might have large sums of money. However, they have an entire future ahead of them, and that career can be cut short very quickly, you know, and especially due to these kind of offences. It's disgusting.
I mean, there are people out there who say that football actually has a massively pernicious influence on men in general, men and boys in general, considering there are so many amongst their fans. Do you think it is time that football is the sport that takes the lead on this?
Well, I mean, it is probably the most prominent sport on TV. So, yes, I do. Yeah, they should be making a stance.
And in terms of, you know, when you look at this culture erupting in sport, is this something that you think is relatively new and happening increasingly in society? Or do you think there's always been this problem when it comes to sports stars, celebrities, essentially exploiting what they think are their rights, given their particular social status?
I don't think it is just football, you know, across singers, boxers, it's across everywhere. I mean, look, this is male violence, right? So that's what we need to address. There is certain pockets of society that believe that this kind of behaviour is okay, and we need to stamp that out. And the more we can talk about it, the better. You know, my son is 17; he's a young lad, and these are the kind of role models. It's not good enough. It's not acceptable to me as a mother.
Zoe, I couldn't agree more. Zoe Drumfield, thank you so much for coming on. Zoe is a domestic abuse survivor and now a campaigner. Well, Ben, finally, what are your thoughts on this? Because, I mean, I'm horrified every time I open the newspaper. And it's every day. day now. It seems every day that a sportsman has done something utterly reprehensible. The kicking cat video today has everybody up in arms. I mean, what's going to happen to that guy? He's going to be paid millions of pounds still and kick cats and footballs, you know.
Yeah, apparently he's still playing against Watford later on tonight, although who knows if he'll get dropped before tonight. But, it doesn't seem that he's faced the comeuppance that we would have expected. But I think one of the problems is you get these young kids, often from certain deprived backgrounds, suddenly rocketing to fame and extreme wealth. And sometimes they're 17, 18 years old and they're suddenly really desirable, very wealthy, having gone from sort of being nothing, sort of zero to hero overnight. And sometimes that sort of goes to their head a bit and they just go a bit mad. And it's, where is the pastoral care within football to make sure that people who go from that sort of small to very big sort of character overnight are being sort of told how to behave and deal with it? A lot of other sports deal with this a lot better, like rugby, for example. They have a culture there where they make sure that young kids going into rugby, getting a career in rugby, they go to university, they marry young or whatever it is. There's a pastoral care there which keeps them quite stable, keeps them on a stable path. So they're not just going extremely wealthy and then they're surrounded by women and there's, extremely famous overnight and just lose the ability, lose perspective and forget about the fact that they actually need to behave like decent human beings.
I mean, how on earth can the big football organisations and the clubs themselves justify their inactivity for so long on this?
Well, because I think there is a culture in football which has been for a long time of this sort of thing happening. You have your characters like George Best back in the day, boozing and womanising, all the rest of it. The problem is now that it's a lot younger, a lot wealthier, because there's a lot more money in football now. So it's on a much higher, much more stratospheric scale. It does need to be dealt with, but it doesn't just need to be dealt with within football, within the FA, within the Premier League. I think there's a bigger cultural issue at play here. For example, a lot of footballers come from more deprived backgrounds in other sports, like cricket or rugby, for example. They tend to be more from working class backgrounds, or they come from certain kinds of communities where they don't have the same level of support. They don't have stable family lives or whatever else, and or they don't have good schooling, good sort of role models, all the rest of it. So I think you need to go to the root. You need to solve the issues on a cultural and a social level as well as within football.
Do you think it'd be reasonable for football managers to say to their players, look, you're paid millions, you're in a really privileged position, you're going to be rich beyond your wildest dreams, just stop going out on Friday and Saturday nights, try and live a more socially conservative lifestyle? Or would that actually be imposing things unnecessarily on young men?
I think, to some degree, you do have to say they need a father figure, or almost they need someone to just say to them, right, focus on your football, focus on your job. You can go off and do what you want to do when you retire or when you're a bit older, but at the moment you just need to, not let it go to your head. You've got extremely wealthy overnight, you're suddenly, in demand. Every, pop star and musician wants to party with you, and you sort of, it goes to their head a little bit, and I think they get a sort of lost under the tide of their newfound fame and wealth. And if you had more pastoral care within football teams, I think that wouldn't happen.
And why do you think it is that, something as, gnawingly vile as violence against women, rape for crying out loud, is eclipsed by protests about racist tweets?
Yeah, no, the sort of the racism thing in football, I think, has been to some degree overplayed, especially since the taking the knee. We've actually seen a spike in racism in football because people sort of react to that sort of outward display. I think if things were done more internally rather than outward displays, which are effectively virtue signalling displays, if things are actually being done internally to prevent that from happening, it would be a lot more effective.
Yeah, you got some good ideas there, Ben. Thank you so much for joining me today and your very sensible and pragmatic input on all of our topics. Well, you too have been emailing us throughout the show with your views about whether the PM, for instance, should apologise for his comments that Sir Keir Starmer failed to prosecute Jimmy Savile and the Labour leader was targeted by protesters outside Parliament. Mick says the Starmer bundle outside Parliament was a set-up. They have got the media dangling on a string for sensational headlines. David says, no, I do not think Boris should apologise to Starmer, as he always reminds the PM as the man at the top, the buck stops there. Well, Starmer was the top bloke at the CPS when they didn't prosecute Savile, so by his own thinking, he should accept responsibility. Tony says Boris should not only apologise, but resign to get this debacle over with. Gear change there. His replacement will then be able to concentrate on the issues facing the country. Indeed, big issues there are too. Sheila says, it is obvious that those who constantly want apologies from Boris are intentionally undermining the PM personally, or they are simply pursuing their own outraged agenda about everything on the planet. When did people start being so hateful and nasty to each other? Where did compassion, forgiveness and perspective all disappear to? I can answer that actually. I'm going to say it's the internet. Isn't it time we regulated it? That's about it for now. Join me again tomorrow for We Need to Talk About. Same place, same time. GB News at 2 o'clock. Coming up next, it's the wonderful Darren McCaffrey with the briefing. First of all, it's time for the weather forecast. Fingers crossed it's going to start getting milder. Bye-bye.
Hello again. A three-way split across the country today. Cloudy and mild in the south, showery but colder in the north, and in between across central parts, a large amount of cloud and some outbreaks of rain and drizzle. Because of this weather front, that's where the rain will be focused through the rest of the day, northern England into parts of Northern Ireland, southern Scotland and North Wales. But it's really staying where it is, and it divides the country between mostly cloudy but some brighter spells in the south, and brighter but also colder with some blustery showers for Scotland, parts of north of Northern Ireland, and those showers falling as snow above 300 or 400 metres. So feeling cold in the wind in the north, but mild where we get some brightness coming through in the south, even as high as 14 Celsius for the likes of London. And then into the evening, the cloudy damp zone in the middle becomes wetter for a time as some heavier bursts of rain push into parts of the Pennines, the Lake District, as well as Snowdonia, and the front slowly sips south. But we keep the mild air to the south, 8 or 9 Celsius through the night here. Colder for Scotland, Northern Ireland, the far north of England, and again, blustery showers. And it's turning colder, so that snow line is coming down, and that means we could even see sleet, hail, snow down to lower levels for central and northern Scotland during Wednesday. Certainly snow building up over any modest hills, really 200 metres and above. The cloud and outbreaks of rain sink south, and it'll be a damp day in places in the far south, but nothing particularly heavy, and it stays mild, 13 Celsius there. But in the north, across Wales, northern England, as well as Scotland and Northern Ireland, brighter skies. Some sunshine, however, it will feel cold. And the wind picks up further in the far north on Wednesday night and into the start of Thursday. Gales or severe gales for the Northern Isles for a time. And Thursday looks like a blustery day for all of us, but brighter skies are pushing south for Friday.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate
from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows. Every day, we ask the questions that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before.
Basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from